This time it's 5 motorcycling myths busted. Now I don't know about you, but I was a massive fan of the TV programme MythBusters. In the programme, if you haven't seen it, two presenters, Jamie Hyneman and Adam Savage, would challenge commonly held misconceptions with the appliance of simple science, or for the use of research and accurate history. And over the years there were a couple of motorcycle myths. So in honour of the dynamic duo, and of course the rest of the team, I thought I'd put a video of 5 classic motorcycle myths together, and then we'll try and work out whether these are true or not. So here we go. Number 1. BMW Motorrad copied ABC in their motorcycle design. Now this particular myth crops up quite often in comments on the YouTube channel, but the big question is it true? I mean, it certainly looks true. The ABC does look rather like a BMW, but of course it does predate it. I'm certainly not suggesting that either company invented the flat twin motorcycle. After all, Douglas Motorcycle, based down in Bristol, had been building flat twins for decades by that point, although in truth their engine ran fore and aft, and didn't run its cylinders across the frame with an inline crank like BMW's and of course ABC did. So what's the truth? Did BMW copy the short-lived ABC 400cc flat twin? Well, the closer you look at the ABC, the more differences you will see between it and early BMWs. With the most obvious of course being that final drive on the ABC was by chain, whilst BMWs have always used shaft drive. While in other areas the ABC appears more advanced than early BMWs, for one thing running overhead valves, many years before they appeared on BMW machines. So what is the real story here? Well, the truth is a little bit less interesting really. BMW built a flat twin engine to be used as a portable generator set for various applications, and they're not really intending to use it in a vehicle. However, a small motorcycle manufacturer called Victoria, who would later become famous for building a Guzzi style V-twin before Guzzi did, installed the BMW generator unit into a motorcycle frame and quickly found that the design would prove popular. Now they're no fools at BMW, and they saw the potential of the design, so thought, well, if you can't beat them, essentially we'll join them, so began to build a motorcycle of their own. And the rest, as they say, well, is history. You could accuse BMW of possibly copying Victoria, but then Victoria were actually using BMW's engine. But as far as the myth goes, did BMW copy ABC? I'm afraid that one's busted. Okay, sticking with the BMW theme, did the Germans make the best use of motorcycles during World War II? Now BMW's motorcycles are synonymous with the use of sidecars. And this myth basically says that BMW and similar Zundapp machines, which were fitted with sidecars, represented the most effective use of the motorcycle during World War II, and furthermore put more machines in the field than the Allies did. Now we tend to see these machines dashing across Germany in propaganda movies, but it has to be remembered that these were just that, propaganda movies, so the numbers of machines that were actually built is far lower than you might think. And interestingly, the inspiration for these machines actually dates back to World War I, when the British Army made extensive use of machine gun toting Kleino 750 V-twins with sidecars fitted, which proved very effective at carrying a Vickers 303 machine gun and its operator across the muddy fields of Northern Europe. And the idea really did take off. During the 1920s and 30s, most armies would include sidecars with heavy machine guns in their armamentarium. The British would use BSA V-twins. In France, Terre would build a 750 V-twin with a clever roller system to stop it bogging down, and of course in Germany there was the Zundapp and BMW machines. And indeed in the early years of the war the BEF would make use of sidecar mounted machine guns just as they had done in World War I. But it was the German machines with their clever extra driven wheel on the sidecar which really caught the imagination of military planners, so much so that Harley-Davidson was tasked by the US government to develop an American alternative. But then came the Jeep, and it was quickly realised that the Jeep was a far more effective way of moving troops and a heavy machine gun across muddy ground, And so with just over 1,000 examples built, Harley-Davidson's XA was abandoned, and the 1,000 models were mostly sent off to the Russian front, where ironically the limitations of these outfits was clearly demonstrated, with the BMWs and Zundaps making heavy weather, no pun intended, of the Russian winter, leaving Harley-Davidson to concentrate on the production of vast numbers of their WLA model. But in fact it wasn't the Americans, or indeed the Germans or Russians, who made the greatest use of motorcycles during World War II. Because the British produced and made use of the most motorcycles of any other army in World War II, and was in fact the most mechanised, contrary to popular belief. The British Army would make extensive use of motorcycles that were mostly designed for off-road use, with the riders, both male and female, being trained by pre-war trial specialist riders. The result was a vast force of specially trained off-road motorcyclists who could carry pretty much anything you wanted from one place to another. And I'm very proud to say that one of those riders was indeed my own grandfather. So did the Germans make the best and most extensive use of motorcycles during the war? Surprisingly, no. Myth busted. Tri-parallel twins were copies or inspired by the German Horrocks design. This myth is fairly straightforward really, and it basically says that Edward Turner was inspired by or basically copied the German-built Horrocks parallel twin when he designed his Speed Twin and later Tiger 100 models. And indeed on initial examination this one looks pretty good. The Speed Twin didn't come out till late 37, early 38, and Horrocks unveiled their design in 1933, giving Triumph a full 4 years to copy the German design. All seems very plausible, but this whole myth does rely on you, well, frankly ignoring a few inconvenient facts. For one thing, the Speed Twin was not Triumph's first parallel twin. This had been the 6-1, a 650 parallel twin, which was introduced in 1933, the same year that the Horrocks had been introduced. And by the time the Horrocks had reached production, the Triumph 6-1 had already been used, with a sidecar fitted no less, in the International 6-day trial. However, the 6-1 was essentially designed as a sidecar machine, a replacement for all those big V-twins which had been popular during the 1920s. And as such, with cheaper cars coming into the market even by that time, it was not a commercial success, with only about 600 machines actually being produced, which is largely why the machine is forgotten today when people discuss British parallel twins. And as always, the parallel twin prototype Triumph of 1914 too. The fact is that both the 6-1 and the Speed Twin both evolved from the same source, and that was the square 4 aerial, on which both Val Page, the designer of the 6-1, and Edward Turner, the designer of the Speed Twin, had been working in the years before they joined Triumph. And the myth in this case is that while they were struggling on the design on a particularly difficult day, Val Page had said, wouldn't it be better just to lob the cylinders off the front and build a parallel twin instead? So there you go, in this case you get two myths for the price of one, but only one of them is actually plausible. Which moves us nicely into our next myth, that the Great British Parallel Twin used a 360 crank because it worked better with single carburetors. Now this for me is a particularly interesting myth because it first seems to have appeared on a very popular YouTube channel. And it simply states that the Brits used a 360-degree crankshaft on their parallel twins because it offered the best possible gas flow in the presence of a single carburetor. Now again, this one seems pretty plausible, doesn't it? You know, you can imagine that it's improved gas flow in some way, there's less dead space or something like that. And the long pauses between pulses and intakes means that there's a better gas flow in some way. But the reality is they're not thinking in the way that a 1930s engineer would, and relies on the fact that the listener will completely ignore some fairly obvious facts that are staring them right in the face. Principally that a wide variety of engines will work perfectly well on a single carburetor, whether in the 1930s or even much later, with everything from large V-twins to 4-cylinder bikes and cars, and indeed flat twins running perfectly happily on a single carburetor. And if you're looking for a more modern example, Take a look at a Honda Rebel. Its 250 engine is a parallel twin, but it runs a 180 crank and still manages to run perfectly acceptably with a single carburettor. And indeed in the past most vehicles did run single carbs. So why did the British parallel twin run a 360 firing order then? Well, there are in fact a number of very practical reasons for this. The small compact engine looks like a big single from the side and indeed sounds very much like a big single too. And in the 30s that was important because singles were the sports bikes. And with a 360 crank and a big flywheel, these engines ran very smoothly at low RPM, without the lumpiness that other twin-cylinder engines have if the revs drop below say 2000 RPM. And this also greatly simplified the ignition system. You only needed one set of points and both plugs could be fired simultaneously, just that one would not be on compression, and the magneto would be running at a relatively low speed too. So in conclusion they used a 360 crank simply because it provided smooth low speed running and relatively simple construction. And so hopefully that's another myth that we've kicked to the curb and busted once and for all. And our final myth for this video: British motorcycles used a right-footed gear change because we ride on the left. Okay, there are essentially two versions of this myth. You can choose yourself which one you think is the most likely. The first one says that because we ride on the left, and the way we do hand signals and whichever shoulder we look over, that's going to be more easy if you ride on the left if the gear change is on the right and the brake is on the left. The foot brake, of course. And the other version of the story essentially says the same thing, but it's because of the use of sidecars. Now I have to say I've tried to break down the logic of both these arguments and neither of them make any sense at all to me. I've ridden machines with both left and right footed gear changes, and the side of the road you're on makes no difference whatsoever. Ditto sidecars, I've ridden sidecars with left and right sided gear changes, and it's completely inconsequential really what side the foot change is on. And if you follow this logic through, then surely all European bikes would have a left sided gear change and a right sided brake. Except they don't. Most of them do, it's true, but Laverda most obviously do not. But then a counter argument could of course be, well, actually all British bikes did have it that way round. They did have a right sided gear change and a left sided brake, didn't they? Or did they? Because the true origin of this myth actually dates back to the days of hand gear change. Look at this hand gear change Royal Enfield. Do you notice where the foot brake is? That's right, it's on the right side, except it shouldn't be there because this is a British bike, isn't it? And yet there it is on the right hand side. Yes, the simple fact is that back in the days of hand gear change, the brake could be on the right or the left, depending on which motorcycle you bought. It was not standardised at all. The gear change, however, was usually on the right on European and British motorcycles. This is simply because, well, the clutch is on the left, and you need your right hand to do the dexterous job of operating the throttles. And let's face it, we've only got two hands, haven't we? So if you're going to operate the clutch with your left and you're going to change gear with the right, well, the gear change has to be on the right if the clutch is on the left. They can't be on the same side. Unless, of course, it's an American motorcycle, but we don't even want to get into that whole foot clutch business. However, cometh the day that Velocet introduced the first foot gear change bike at the TT. This then left manufacturers with a decision to make. Do you move the gear change to the left? Or do you move the foot brake to the left? Because you can't have two pedals on one side, can you? And so the Brits, in general, make the simplest decision from an engineering point of view. They simply move the brake pedal over to the left side. In Europe, they did the opposite and moved the gear change lever instead. It's as simple as that. Myth well and truly busted. So if you'd like to see more videos of this type, do let us know below. Also let us know if there's a bike or collection of bikes you'd like to see us cover, or indeed if you have a bike we can use for a test ride. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.